All right, Kim, tell us what's on your radar.
Afghan refugees are beginning to arrive here in the United States. And despite the discussion in the media about whether or not or how many people we should be taking in, upon their arrival, they will be met with welcome and warmth. It is in these moments of humanity and generosity when Americans shine brightest. Now, I want to take a moment to tell you about my own family's journey from Vietnam to America. In the spring of 1975, the Northern Vietnamese Army was advancing on Saigon. The troops were already gone. They were pulled back home in 1973. The only Americans left were embassy workers, contractors, and other NGOs. My grandmother was in a relationship with an American helicopter contractor. She had 4 teenage kids at home, my mom being one of them. Her second oldest daughter, my Aunt Wei, was an adult and had married an American serviceman, and when the troops were called back home, she went with him. My grandmother's oldest daughter, my Aunt Lan, was married to a fighter in the Southern Vietnamese Army, and together they had a 4-year-old little girl. My grandma held out hope nearly to the very end that Saigon would not fall. She didn't want to leave her home, her friends, her business, her dog, but the embassy kept putting pressure on the American contractor, my step-grandpa Don, to leave. It was time to go. The North was coming. My grandma and Don weren't officially married. This was pretty common in Vietnam. American servicemen and contractors would take wives but never filed proper papers. I mean, who would you file a marriage license with when you're 1,000 miles from America? This complicated the evacuation, but he wasn't going to leave without the family he had unofficially adopted. When questioned on who would go with them, my grandma lied, thinking she'd be more likely to be approved if she told them it would be only her and her 2 youngest daughters. But after she was cleared to be evacuated and it was time to gather at Tan Son Nhut Air Base, my grandma showed up with everyone. My mom, her other younger daughter, her 2 twin teen boys, my oldest aunt, and her 4-year-old daughter as well. Now, my oldest aunt decided to stay behind to be evacuated with her husband, a Vietnamese fighter who was scheduled to be evacuated a couple of days later. But she sent along with the family her 4-year-old daughter. They left on April 27th, just 3 days before the fall of Saigon. My family boarded a military cargo plane packed with others and left for Clark Air Base in the Philippines. It was there where they watched the North invade the city and the fall of their beloved home from a television. Unfortunately, my aunt, who stayed behind, soon found out that her husband had been killed in combat. The air base my family flew out from had been destroyed by the North the day after they left, and she had no way out. She was stuck and left behind in Vietnam, her entire family and her daughter gone. From the Clark Air Base in the Philippines, my family went to Guam for processing, where they stayed a few weeks, sleeping in tents before finally being resettled in the United States. My mom tells me she was amazed by how nice and clean everything looked when she arrived here in America. They were settled in Boise, Idaho, because my aunt, the one who married a serviceman, had been living there where he was from for the previous 2 years. She tells me how neighbors came to give them home-cooked dishes of food and welcome them to the area. She says everyone looked the same to her, and English sounded like a bunch of S's strung together. Neighbor kids would invite my cousin outside to play, even though they couldn't understand her. She would play sports with them and eventually became a soccer star. High school was tough. My mom didn't know the language. She knew math, having already learned calculus by the time she was 12. She envied the other girls' light hair and their big, beautiful eyes. There were a few other Vietnamese families that had also been settled in Boise. They stuck together and they formed strong bonds. They found jobs and eventually opened restaurants and nail salons. When I was growing up, my family often talked about going back to Vietnam when things got better. They yearned for home. You see, refugees have a different mentality than immigrants. Immigrants often come in search of opportunity and a better life, but refugees come in a moment of desperation and fear. Refugees think their situation is temporary, and as soon as their country gets through the rough patch, when the bad government is finally replaced or the war is over, they think they will go back and be reunited with loved ones in the place they call home. But reality eventually wins out. It takes decades for a war-torn nation to rebuild, and during those decades, life happens. Careers are built, homes are bought, marriages happen, and children are born. The American-born children don't want to go back to a home they've never known, and families don't want to be split up again. I remember feeling afraid as a kid hearing the conversations about going back to Vietnam. My other American-born cousins and I would worry that we would be uprooted from our home here in America and taken to live in a place we had never been. I think after a while it dawned on my family that going back wasn't ever going to happen. They were too rooted. And they'd grown to really love America. They became citizens, started businesses, adopted much of the culture. They'd always felt loved and welcomed here. America is a wonderful country filled with wonderful people. And some of the most welcoming and wonderful people are in places like Idaho and Oklahoma, where people easily open their arms, hearts, and homes to people in need, even people who are very different from them and from very different places. People in my community were always so curious about me and my family. They were fascinated by our culture, food, and language. And despite whatever political debate may have dominated the news regarding whether or not the country should take in more people, my family never felt anything but welcome. And I'm confident that my family's experience will be the same for the thousands of Afghans who are arriving in our nation. We Americans do one thing really, really well, and that is embrace others in need. Those arriving need our help. So if you can, look into becoming a sponsor. Find an organization in your community that can help facilitate. Just Google sponsor Afghan refugees, and you'll find many resources about how to do it and what it entails. You can also donate supplies and other comforts to get them on their feet. And in the least, as you see these people begin to make their lives within our communities, be it restaurants they open or services they offer, just be there with a smile, because that will be more than enough. Now, Alyssa, I know that you've been helping some people get out of Afghanistan. You've been in contact, trying to facilitate. How is that going?
Well, Kim, first off, thank you for sharing your family's story. It's such a remarkable one. It's been tough. I've been in touch with a number of groups. One that's been doing incredible work on the ground is No One Left Behind. It's run by veterans who are trying to help evacuate Afghan interpreters as well as their families. So they're working mostly the logistical side of physically getting people from Afghanistan to the U.S. But then there are a number of groups here in the U.S. for when families arrive to help get them settled. One that I'm involved with is Vital Voices. That specifically helps women who are at risk, helps resettle them, helps with education, safety, and placement. But there's so many resources, and many of the best ones are going to be specific to people's communities. So to your point, I would, simply Google Afghan refugees, Washington, D.C., and you could do very targeted help for your community. And I would just say, I've tried to speak out about this as much as I can. There are some within my own party, among the Republican Party, who don't want to see Afghans resettled in our country. Maybe they don't look like us. Maybe they're not your idea of what America is. I can tell you, people who volunteered, raised their hand to serve alongside U.S. forces at risk of life and limb at the hands of the Taliban and other terrorist elements are exactly the kind of brave, loyal people we need in America, and we should absolutely open our doors to them. Ryan?
Yeah,
go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah, there's a Lutheran church here, I think it's in Virginia, outside of D.C., that is helping people resettle. And one of the things that they say they need help with, they say, look, if you have a bedroom, you have a couple of bedrooms with access to a kitchen and to a bathroom, they need, people need help for a, say, 1 to 3 month period while they get resettled. Mm-hmm. So it's not as if they're asking you to house an entire another family for for all the way through their kids' high school. It's just help them get on their feet here. They also, of course, need donations. If they're asking if you can help cover people's rent for a couple month period while they're getting up off of the ground. There's a lot of fear coming from the right now about whether or not ISIS or Al Qaeda is going to smuggle somebody in. And sure, they certainly might try that. But if that's what they're concerned about, this is a country that has 30 guns for every single human being that's already
right.
here. We have millions of extremely dangerous, extremely unstable, armed people in desperate situations already in this country. Adding another handful to that is not appreciably going to make this country a more dangerous place. It's already a very dangerous place. That ship has sailed, and if people cared about that, there are things they could do about it, far beyond trying to keep tens of thousands of desperate people out of the country.
And one thing, go ahead, Kim.
Well, I was just going to say that I know that the administration has set aside some money. So one thing I want to bring up, because I know that people are kind of like, oh, well, what are we going to do with all these people, and how are we going to, and just kind of the thought of, are we going to have to take them in and give them housing and whatnot. And the way it usually works, I would imagine this time like it did for my family, which is the administration sets aside a certain amount of money, and that money goes to the families to give them, like a year's, let's say, worth of rent, like set up in a low income sort of housing situation. usually pays for them to get some English courses and get them set up in schools and whatnot. So the immediate need is just immediate. The government will ultimately come in and help. But that immediate need is, these people literally are coming with what they could carry. So not much, so young kids and teenagers, they need clothes, they want toys, things that kind of would help them feel more settled.
Exactly. And one thing I would note to Ryan's point, because I'm helping sponsor a number of interpreters and family members, to even get through the process at the State Department to be considered for entrance to Hamid Karzai, they need your passport number, date of birth, they need the last few places that you've lived, they need families associated, they need a U.S. sponsor. In some cases, they ask for multiple ones. So this notion that people are just hopping on and we have no idea who they are, it's just not accurate. It's a very, very rigorous process.
Alyssa, looking forward to what's on your radar next.